for two. Kickers are extra, I give them the boot. Ooh, going for two. Sit back, relax while I grab me a brew. Ooh, now I'm reclining while putting my time and I'm ready to go. My spine is aligning and much my lineups, my bank account grow. I am so rich, but knowledge is all that I'm leaving it with. Ooh, listen to this. Multiple options, how far can I get? Ooh, DFS Dynasty redraft tonight, I'm not finishing last. I'm finishing past any and all, I am looking to last. What else? This spot is popping and I am so locked in and only opening the door when it is opportunity knocking. And all of these spots keep on talking and talking. So what are we talking? What kind of alignment? And running it deep, even players forgotten or came from the bottom or hitting that top end. And this spot is popping, yeah, this spot is popping. And woo, this is the armchair, yeah. Put up your arms, yeah. Sound the alarm, yeah, yeah, yeah. Ooh.
What is going on, and welcome to the ColumBUST Dynasty Auction Salary Cap Personal League Podcast. I'm your host, of course, Geoff Lambert. Follow me on Twitter at JeffLambert77. Of course, we're here to break down this 12-team league. Joining me tonight on the show, we have a great panel. We have Mr. Auction Draft himself, Mr. Salary Cap, Kyle Sentra. Of course, he's a writer and ranker for GoingFor2.com. Also hosts a slew of shows on the Going for Two Live Network, including the 2-Point Conversion, the Press Coverage Podcast. He's going to be doing our Sunday morning pregame show during the season and our Monday pregame show during the season. What's up, Kyle?
Busy. Football's here. Love it. It's great. But I absolutely love Reality Sports Online, the RSO format, salary cap and contract league. So to do a PLP for that format, we've had another league. Also from RSO, sign up for PLP's last couple seasons. So to get some new blood in here, a different league too. Exciting times at Going for Two Live.
And this was a word of mouth because the other league is actually, I have friends with this guy in this league. So it's a word of mouth that he found us. So we appreciate that.
Yes, we did something right.
Yeah. All right. Also joining us on the panel tonight, Brian Ford. Of course, he's host of the Dynasty Saturday Night 5 show right here on Going for Two Live. Also host of the Dynasty Fever podcast. You can find him on Twitter at @FFJunkie_. What's up, Brian?
Hey, how we doing? Glad to be here. Yeah, as the song says, this spot is popping and I am so locked in. I'm just here to be pretty and talk about players. If we have any league mates there in the chat. Kyle knows the contract stuff much better than I do, so sorry.
Yeah, me and Brian are just here to rank the teams. Kyle's here for the expert knowledge on how these leagues are run. So that's why we like to have him on these ones to give his insight on these things. All right, so if you're not in this league and you're wondering what the heck this is a PLP, Personal League Podcast. Essentially, I gave these two gentlemen all the rosters of this league. They ranked the leagues, the teams in order from 12 to 1, with 12 being the team they'd least like to take over and 1 being the team they would most like to take over. So it's not worst and first. It's more about taking a team over as an orphan and what we can do with that roster. We can, improve it and things that we can do with it. So that's how we rank them. From that, we create sort of a consensus ranking, which we'll count down tonight from 12 to 1. And each of these guys have been assigned 6 teams each. When we get to their teams in the rankings, they will break them down, strengths, weaknesses, things they can do to improve. Kyle will offer his insights on some of the salary cap side of things. But with that said, let's go ahead and just jump right into team number 12.
Number 12.
Number 12 team was ranked as high as 11 and as low as 12. So a fairly consensus ranking in last. And I will say, this league is pretty flat across the board. Any of these teams could have been put in any order because even this team has some really, really good players. And that is Pinky Stiggs. And Brian, this is your team here. Give us the breakdown.
Yeah, I want to echo what you said about there being some flatness in the league. I think that the differences are going to be more about, I would predict certain players that we like more than other people do or less, or cap space, things like that. Because draft capital tends to play a role when we do the sort of usual PLPs. But yeah, Pinky Stiggs, the quarterbacks are pretty thin when you think about Jaden Daniels. And even if you are optimistic about his ceiling, your only other quarterback is AOC, right? So you've got a rookie and AOC. And then you throw in some of the critiques and downside that I have about Jaden, and that makes it a pretty thin quarterback room. And quarterback is pretty darn important in this league. Your running backs are solid, and I think you have a pretty good amount. Like I like to see like 6 running backs for every 4 wide receivers in a roster. But I think it's a little top heavy, right? Like HN, obviously explosive, can win you any week. I'm maybe a tad below consensus on Pacheco, but he's still, very good and going to be productive. James Cook, I think, will surprise some folks this year. I think Cook and Ray Davis are going to be the Walmart version of Gibbs and Monty. And then you got Joe Mixon, who, age and efficiency, but at the same time, in a great offense that's going to score a lot of touchdowns, and he certainly has the lead back role there. Then you've got Tank Bigsby, who I think you still should have faith in as a good insurance running back with some contingent upside. AJ Dillon, who's getting buzz in camp as the RB2 for Green Bay, and then Antonio Gibson. Your wide receivers are mixed, but pretty good. You've got Lamb, obviously, through the roof. Worthy, to the moon on him. I'm way above consensus. Not way, I guess some people have caught up. Terry McLaurin, there are some concerns, but certainly promising with the OC and the quarterback, and Cooper Kupp riser lately. We're kind of seeing people realize, oh wait, if Cooper Kupp's healthy, he's really darn good. Then you sort of your next tier is Wandale Jalen Polk, who I think is solid, but has perhaps a low ceiling, and then sort of a dart with QJ there. And then it's not a tight end premium league, but you do have good tight ends. Bowers, I think, is elite. He's my tight end 3, and then Ferguson, who is he runs a lot of routes and he'll get some targets on that team for sure. So I think the biggest issue I have first off would be the cap space. It looks like you only have $3 million, and I'm no salary cap expert in these leagues, but when I see you have $3 million and then there are some teams that have over 20, then that's something that raises a flag for me. What I want you to do is you have too much value stored in your running back position, right? So you're a little top heavy. I want you to move off some of that and then break those guys into perhaps freed up salary if it works with the league, maybe a young wide receiver, and then also like younger upside, the type of running backs that you would see if you were building like through like a 0 RB build, right? So I just think you have too much value stored in the position that gets injured a lot and ages really quickly. And of course, thin quarterback room and small cap. So that's kind of why you're toward the bottom. Thanks.
Yeah, I was just going to say, towards the bottom, quote unquote, this team has a top 3 dynasty asset in CeeDee Lamb, a top 15-ish dynasty asset in Devin Achane, a top 2 rookie asset in Jaden Daniels, and we have him at 12. So it's just to kind of point out how flat this league is. This is a team that's still pretty good on paper, and we have him 12th. Kyle, I want to get your opinions here on what you thought of this team. You had him 1 spot higher than me and Brian. You did have him at 11, so you liked a little bit more than me and Brian did.
Well, and I think I really like the Jaden Daniels contract. And this is where I'll get into like that side, which thanks for providing that information because it gives great context. It's a 3-year deal, average at about, I think I calculated 17 million per year, which some of the like for reference sake, I think the highest player average per season is like in the 60 millions. So there's some guys that went for crazy high amounts. And I think to piggyback off Brian's point of moving a running back, I look at who's likely to be moved. I would think it's the 3 that are on rookie contracts in the NFL: Achane, Pacheco, and Cook. I guess Bigsby could count as that too. I think those 3. And Mixon, you're less likely to move. And if I look at their salaries per year, Mixon's almost making not quite half, but almost half per year what Achane's making. And Pacheco and Cook are close there, so it'd be one of those 3 to move, I think, because that would also solve the problem of cap space if you're getting a cheaper player than one of Achane, Pacheco, and Cook. So to move, off of one of those guys, maybe that's how you. Because my thing is, I think this team needs to get a second quarterback, and because like Aiden O'Connell, I think I saw it correctly, it's just a 1-year minimum contract, so. It's just Jaden Daniels this season's done unless you're tagging Aiden O'Connell with a franchise tag, which could get really expensive. Next year, too, it could be even thinner where you only have Jaden Daniels. And of course, you'll have rookie picks. And I think we're all expecting this team might be picking high. So maybe the rookie draft next year is how to address quarterback. But I think there are ways to do it via trade. I think I like Brian's suggestion. I also think maybe moving off one of the tight ends, whether it's Bowers or Ferguson. They're both on 2-year contracts. And I find this league is interesting how teams decided to divvy it up this year. Some teams went full into just 1-year contracts on tight ends. Other teams did something like this where they got multiple tight ends on multiple years with their contracts. In this case, 2 years on both Bowers and Ferguson. And that makes me wonder if one of those teams that only took 1-year contracts on tight end, they may want to trade for one of these guys to help for this year, but also thinking forward stability for next year. And I wonder, should you just sell the hype on Bowers right now? Is it too early to sell the hype on the rookie guy? I'm wondering, you combine Bowers with James Cook. Could that help you get a quarterback?
Yeah, good call. And Andrew chimed in. He is actually, I think, the commissioner of the league, saying that the auction draft, obviously it was a startup draft, and the auction actually included the rookies. So there was not a rookie draft separate. It was all together. So that some more context there as well.
Which is usually the fairest way to do a startup. I mean, because the problem with RSO is that you have to do the rookie draft before the auction. So you're kind of, that's always a weird. I think I've talked about this before with you, Brian. Whenever I do a mock rookie draft in the off seasons, I always come back to this idea of, okay, you're doing the rookie draft before you even do the startup draft, because everyone, in rookie drafts, or mock drafts, like the one boring content is, well, it's team dependent. Well, of course it is. So you approach it with that mentality that it's like there's no team set, like you're building the team with the rookie draft. But that's totally tangent off topic, which we might do a lot tonight. I had one more point I wanted to make though about this team before we moved on. Sorry. Sure. That in the auction you get a certain number of contracts. So like for instance, I think the standard for the site is 1 4-year contract, 2 3-year contracts, 3 2-year contracts, and the rest you win in 1-year contracts. I believe they upped each of those amounts. Maybe not the 2-year contracts, but I noticed almost every team had 2 players on 4-year contracts. So they've given that extra amount. I think 3 3-year contracts. So there's more longer term contracts than there would be in any typical fashion. But to have the 2 4 years and how are you going to dish them out? They chose to go with CD, which makes sense, but then also Xavier Worthy. And it's not overly expensive, but I do think there is a bit of a risk giving the rookie the 4-year contract before you've seen what he's worth. So it's that added to it, I think. Ultimately, though, I really liked the Jaden Daniels contract, and that attracted me to okay, I can build around that contract as a quarterback. Where there's some other teams with other contracts that I liked a little less, but certainly can understand why you both ranked at 12, seeing just Jaden Daniels and Aiden O'Connell's right at the start. It's a pretty scary proposition. A lot of risk there at quarterback.
Yeah, good call. Brett B just chimed in too. He says he's following the rosters on the site because he can't see the video. Obviously it's hard to do on YouTube to fit all in there, but he just realized that this team dropped O'Connell yesterday to pick up Sam Darnold. So that's something that may have factored into our rankings originally with Aiden O'Connell. I don't know if Sam Darnold's that much better than Aiden O'Connell, but he's going to be the starter at least, right?
I guess maybe it's the floor of you expect him to get more starts, but that's assuming the Vikings don't do anything at quarterback, which they still could. So.
Well, hold on a second. They signed Matt Corral, so I mean that. Not to stretch this out too much, but I do think Darnold might surprise people with how adequate he can be in a system and with a coach who kind of put things together with chewing gum and duct tape with Josh Dobbs and Nick Mullins last year. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a good call. All right, we've spent enough time on team number 12. Let's get to team number 11.
Number 11.
All right, so a common theme in this some of these rankings here is we had some pretty large disparities. This team was ranked as low as 11, but as high as 5. And Kyle, you had this team at 5. It is Bristol Pineapples. Talk about why you had them so high, and what are me and Brian missing?
And to showcase also like how flat we think this year is, which to the point that's been made already in the chat, we expect coming out of a startup, right? Like not teams that haven't decided to go with full rebuild and like stretch out the edges of like how good the top teams are and how bad the bottom teams are. So yeah, it is after a startup before a first season's gone. It's typically what we'd expect, but other than Pinky Stiggs, Their consensus ranking or aggregate ranking, I guess, was 11.67. From this next team, it drops by 3 points to 8.67, and then the next 4 teams in a row are all going to be within 1 point of each other. So, like, this is and what creates that is like you know, these large disparities where I'm kind of viewing something, especially looking at the contracts, that I see more than the others. To be fair, this team is interesting because they really push the scrubs and dubs strategy. 4 players essentially make up 75% of the salary cap.
Wow.
CJ Stroud, Jahmyr Gibbs, Jonathan Taylor, and AJ Brown. Now, what we'll notice with some teams is they might use the 4-year contract cheaper. Like, I'm going to get a player for cheaper for a really long time. This was not a team. This was a team where I'm using the longer term contracts on the best players, which means they will likely be some of the most expensive per average years as well as total salary years. They really push that with those 4 players. So a lot of it's built around that. And typically that can be risky, but I felt they built well around the rest of the team. And they still have tons of cap space. Like, to Brian's point earlier, they were one of the teams with 20 plus million in cap space. So to push all that forward on 4 players, and yet you still have like the second most cap space in the league, it's intriguing because it allows for a lot of flexible opportunities. This is one of the couple teams. There's 2 teams that are above 20 million. They can essentially go get any player they want. Like, they can, I mean, anyone can go get any player they want if they're willing to pay for it, but other teams are going to have to be, well, I've got to give a certain amount back to make the salary work. This is a team where, okay, I can just flat up give a pick to go buy a player, add them because I've got the cap space. So that's one aspect that made it appealing and flexible, which is why I ranked them inside the top 5. It just, again, built through Stroud, Brown, and I got to say, I'm pretty sure Stroud had the highest contract amount for a quarterback. I also just did an RSO startup this offseason, and Stroud was the highest quarterback in that league too in terms of total value. So it's the hype on Stroud is real, and maybe I'm willing to drink the juice a little bit and say I'm good for it. I think the one thing I would suggest is, I mean, they roster 5 tight ends. That's the tricky thing. But the one thing I like about it is, other than Cole Kmet, they're all 1-year contracts. So you go from 5 this year to, as soon as next year starts before the auction, you only have 1. And I actually almost think push that further. The same point I think I made with the last team. You convert Cole Kmet into a 1-year tight end. And the advantage this team would have is they can, if someone has like a lot of money invested on a 1-year tight end and they maybe want to change that to a multi-year guy, I think Kmet offers that opportunity. And the tight end you're getting back, if they increase your salary cap, which they most likely will, because Kmet's pretty cheap on his 3-year contract. It's actually just over $6 million per year, almost $7 million per year, compared to what some of these other tight ends are making. That's fairly relative cheap. If someone believes in Cole Kmet's upside, that'd be great to have. You go get a George Kittle on a 1-year deal, maybe even a Travis Kelce if you're willing to add extra to Kmet. And this team has the cap space to just absorb something like that. So it makes those trades easier. So that's why I was willing to rank them. I like that they've got like a Lockett on a 1-year deal. That's use them for points this year, and then next year get out and hope you can find a wide receiver too. I'm sure Brian says Jameson Williams a fine wide receiver too. I guess I disagree a little bit. But yeah, not much running back depth. That's the other issue too. Gibbs, Taylor, and then just Moss and Dobbins, and we don't know what Dobbins is going to be. So I think to have 5 tight ends and 4 running backs, I would want to switch that mix. Now, so the one aspect I guess I should explain to both Geoff and Brian is the contracts that are minimum contracts, which in RSO are $500,000 contracts. You can cut them for free, and they won't count against cap space. So, for instance, Tyler Conklin and Isaiah Likely are on minimum contracts. I would just literally cut the 2 of them and pick up 2 running backs, and then your mix is 6 running backs to only 3 tight ends already right off the bat, and you don't lose any cap space doing something like that. That will be the same. But any other player that's not on minimum contracts, their cap hits are, for this year, fully guaranteed. The only way to save money off them is actually to put them on injured reserve. You save half the cap space there. So, yeah, I think my quick move is just, cut Conklin, cut Likely, pick up 2 running backs with that. And that's how you help the depth there. You're still, if you choose to keep Kmet and build through Kmet for multiple years, That's great because you're not spending a lot of money at tight end, which allows to spend money elsewhere. This team just has the advantage of having all this money. They can actually go make moves. So this is why I was willing to rank them higher than what appears on surface is a not so deep dynasty team, probably because they went so heavy into the scrubs.
Yeah, fair point. That's really good insight because when I first saw that ranking, I'm like, me and Brian are missing something on the contract side of things because we both had them pretty low. And just looking at the waiver wire right now, what's still available out there, like Bucky Irving, Tyrone Tracy, Kamani Vidal, Will Shipley, all those guys. You're saying you would drop the 2 tight ends and pick up one of those guys. Is that how I understood you?
Yeah, for sure. I like Isaiah Likely. It's good as a backup to Andrews, but I think it functions more in Dynasty where you're going to go, okay, I'm going to have him for multiple years. So if the year that Andrews misses, I've got him. With Likely in this format on just a 1-year contract, you're really banking on it being this year for the impact. So if Andrews goes the whole season, doesn't get hurt, you're kind of like wasting Likely. Like, when are you really going to play him? So I also view like Cole Kmet and Noah Fant as those are the guys I'd rather be starting. Like, pick the matchups between those two. And that's why I view Conklin and Likely because of their contracts, you can cut them. In theory, I'd rather have both over Cade Stover, but they bid up on Cade Stover, so you can't just cut Cade Stover for free. That could be a player, though, at some point, just to free the roster spot, you might cut him. And it's only like they got $1 million in dead cap. But yeah, that's kind of how I was thinking of approaching it.
All right, great breakdown. I don't have anything else to add other than the question that I asked. Let's go ahead and get to team number 10.
Number 10.
Number 10, ranked as high as 7 and as low as 9. It is Drew for the Shoe. And Brian, this is your squad. Give us your breakdown.
I'm just realizing now with the team name and with their QB1 that we might have a Colts fan here, maybe. So honestly, that just occurred to me because I'm not on laundry Twitter, but I remember isn't For the Shoe like the official hashtag of
it is, and actually Colts? I'm looking at the picture. His avatar has a Colt in the background.
Right on. Well, good news, Drew for the Shoe. You have the quarterback that's going to break fantasy football this year. And my dynasty quarterback 3, and that's Anthony Richardson. To the effing moon. I could do a whole 3-hour episode on my thoughts on Richardson. The ceiling is just the limit does not exist. Right? Then we've got Stafford as a QB2, which is fine, and he's old and getting dinged up, as usual. And Jones, Daniel Jones, there is some, talk of is he going to get the rust treatment where they if they're out of it, they'll bench him for the injury guarantees and stuff. So would I want to see something a little more solid behind Richardson? Sure. Would I mind starting the year with these as my 3 QBs? No, you're good, especially because you have AR. The running backs, though, is where we kind of run into a problem. There's too few of them, and I think just overall, I would just kind of call them meh. A lot can go wrong here. Obviously, we all love Brees. He's my dynasty running back, too. A lot of people are saying even in redraft that he should be taken ahead of Bijan. I get it, But Kendre Miller, as much as I want to believe that there's some rushing there for him because Kamara's getting dusty and inefficient, the vibes are so bad, the reports are bad. He's injured. They're running. I just saw a beat reporter say Taysom Hill could be the number 2 rusher on the team. And then you got Estime, who again I like, but things have to break right for, and Keaton Mitchell, who is coming off a devastating injury and could get Wally pipped by Rasheen Ali. I know people in the PLPs are sick of me saying that about Rasheen Ali and Keaton Mitchell, right? So you only have 4 of them, and after Brees, you ain't got much. So that's an issue. Wide receivers, you have a very good top 3 to 5 wide receivers, but I think probably overall too many, and that kind of speaks to that ratio of running backs to wide receivers that I like to see. Just for those who can't see or are listening, we got Amon-Ra, Drake London, Tank Dell, and Brian Thomas Jr., sort of the top 4 there. I am a little bit below consensus on Amon-Ra. I think we've seen his ceiling, but either way, you've got a top 5 or 6 dynasty wide receiver there. I'm to the moon on London and Pitts and Atlanta this year. Love Tank Dell, obviously. Great buzz for Brian Thomas Jr. lately. Christian Watson, I'm a believer. Adonai Mitchell, good good swing to take. There's some upside there. And with Downs injured, he may really see some time. Troy Franklin, the vibes could not be worse. OBJ, and Jacoby Myers, right? Although finds a way to like annoy people with PPR points every week. So, he might be one of those guys that you keep for cheap points because they might be expensive with a sexier player. So again, we're looking at the running back to wide receiver ratio. Tight ends, Juwan Johnson and Jelani Woods. I like both guys more than most people do, but that's not a tight end room I would want to go into the year with. At the same time, it's not tight end premium, so I don't know that it matters as much. And you seem to have pretty tiny cap space, unless there was some number we missed in there when other teams have 27 million and you got 13,000. It's like this is like, are you taking financial lessons from me? Like, are you looking at my bank account and saying, oh, this is how I destroy my finances? Because that might be what's going on here. So what I want you to do is add to the running back room. You need to get younger guys with upside and pass catching ability, the type of guys we like to see in a 0 RB build, and you're going to want to move some wide receiver value to do it. I don't often recommend using wide receiver value to get running backs, but you're really thin at running back. So I would take a look at one of those top 4, maybe Tank Dell, depending on the contract. Kyle can tell me, maybe package that with like an 80 Mitchell or something, and try to get a more solid running back room if indeed you want to compete. Yeah.
So he actually put it in the chat that there was a trade. I'll go ahead and put it up on screen here.
You've inspired him already, Brian. Good job.
He unloaded Amon-Ra St. Brown and Stafford, and he got Derrick Henry, Brandon Ayuk, Kirk Cousins, and I guess that's 2 second-round picks.
So I interpreted that.
And I guess
he also gave away Brian Thomas. So
Brian Thomas was in that trade as well.
You add the 2 picks in.
Freed up $6 million of cap space as well.
Well, I was going to say, because Amon-Ra is the guy I referenced earlier. He had the biggest cap hit of any player, because unlike all the other elite receivers, Amon-Ra was on a 3-year contract. And typically, you add the extra year to less the cap hit per year. So, like, if you're going to be bidding top dollar on the elite receivers, typically the guy on the 3-year contract will be the more expensive per year than the 4-year, because they're all because that 4th year kind of spreads out the cap hit based on the algorithm in the auction room. It's you lower the cap hit per year because you're adding that extra year, and because it's a significant amount, it's adding all that whatever half that hit is for that year in guarantees. So Amon-Ra's contract was really difficult because of it only being 3 years, and cap hit is so huge. I think that's what limited him, because when he down, when Andrew was down at point, at what, 13,000, a minimum contract is 500,000. So if they cut any player, like let's say they just cut Troy Franklin to pick up a player, they wouldn't actually physically be able to pick up another player. There wouldn't be enough cap space. It's a per week thing. So eventually 13,000 would be enough to pick up a player, but that's so late in the year. But by even like 6 million is significant, because like even an extra 500,000 would be enough to give you a contract. So
I'm looking at the players, right? And let's just say Stafford to Cousins is a fairly lateral move, right? I'm thinking, the gap between Amon-Ra and Ayuk for me isn't huge. And then you improve your running back room with Henry on top of that, and add the draft capital and the 6 million, but you still got to give up Brian Thomas. I think what you did for your franchise in this format, from what I can tell, what I've learned from this format, I think makes a lot of sense.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Especially if they're going after it this year, Henry certainly helps with the points. And like Ayuk's not too shabby to get either. So like, Brian Thomas, that's something that his value might be better next season. So from a single season perspective too, I think it makes sense, as much as it sucks to lose Amon-Ra, to get both Henry and Ayuk in the lineup. The drawback of Thomas, like, you compare that, just like those 4 players, you're probably making out on top with more points this year.
Yeah, good breakdown. Anything else you wanted to add, Kyle, before we move on to the next team?
I was going to say a quick way to save money right now would have been to put Keaton Mitchell on injured reserve. So the way IR works, actually RSO has changed this, because you can designate a player to return from injured reserve. But typically what you do is, if you put a player on IR, it's like a finite, it's a final thing. Like you can't reactivate them off injured reserve.
Like the NFL used to be before they did the whole
Yeah, so now you can designate one of the IR players to return, but it's still only one. But anyway, the thinking is there's a chance Keaton Mitchell, Brian, is just like the NFL, like because if an NFL team puts a player on injured reserve before the season, that's an entire year. So like if the Ravens decide to put Keaton Mitchell on injured reserve for the season so that he doesn't count on their 53-man roster and he just spends the whole year on IR, he's essentially useless. So you could get ahead of that and just do it in this league. It would save I wrote it down. It would save 2.75 million, which would have been super significant before this trade where you save 6 million anyway. So now there's probably less reason to do it. You may as well wait and see what the Ravens decide to do at the time of their initial 53-man roster. Is he still on the pup list? Maybe they can just hold him there and then eventually bring him up. Because like Brian said, with Rasheen Ali, that might take away that roster spot. And so the Ravens don't have to make a decision this year. They might, okay, we'll put Keaton Mitchell on injured reserve. We still control him. And if we let Justice Hill go next year, that's when we bring him back to the team. So that would have been a way to do it, but it doesn't necessarily solve the running back depth problem. Now with Derrick Henry, though, maybe you're more willing to do something like that. So if you ever need an extra $3 million or $2.5 million, you could just throw Keaton Mitchell on injured reserve, thinking you're probably not missing much from him this year.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Oh, drop Odell Beckham. He's a minimum contract. You can just drop OBJ, pick up a random running back body. Like that. That's an easy move to do right off the bat. The problem is the rest of the wide receivers, none of them are on minimum contracts, so you can't just go and drop any of them. Other than Troy Franklin, and the only reason I say that is because it's just a 1-year contract. Like that's the unfortunate thing with a lot of the rookies in this league. They ended up being later in the auction, so there's a lot of rookies just on 1-year contracts, and some of them are almost to the point where if you're not expecting them to produce this year, unless you're giving them an extension because that's something that will happen during the season, players will be eligible for extension. That's all an algorithm that decides those amounts. So some of them could be super low. So you might get lucky if a rookie's really not producing. You might be able to get them on a cheap extension this year. But if you don't, you're having to franchise tag them. That's like top 5 based on the player's salary of that position. So that's super expensive. So for some of these rookies, there might not even be a point to hold them. So a guy like Troy Franklin, I could see just cutting him because unless you think I'm getting tons of production from him this year, probably not. He's probably just going to go back to the auction next year anyway, so you may as well try and win him next year, is the thinking.
Yeah, good point. All right, let's get to team number 9.
Number 9.
Number 9 team, another big disparity here, ranked as high as 5, as low as 11. It is Slaw on the knob. And Kyle, this is your team here. Give us your breakdown.
I'm the middleman. For once, I'm not the reason there's a big disparity. This is between Brian and Geoff, but most of the rest of the episode will be between me and Brian. But honestly, I think I originally had them lower in the rankings. I eventually raised them up to 9. But my thinking was Tua on a 2-year contract, and I guess now Matthew Stafford on a 1-year contract, because this would have been the team that traded away Cousins.
Yeah.
So just to recalibrate here. I guess I suppose I kind of like it from this team's perspective. Now they've gone, I guess from 8.5 million to about 2.5 million. So they had enough cap space after the auction. I think 8.5 million was like the 3rd or 4th most amount that we saw. So they had just enough money to go and make this type of deal and suddenly acquire Amon-Ra St. Brown. And in the interest of getting the best asset, that certainly helped. Harrison, Amon-Ra, Christian McCaffrey, Ken Walker, that's like the long-term, and Trey McBride. Those are all the long-term pieces, but notice I didn't say a quarterback. So that's the one thing that scared me was after this season, now one season with Stafford, and then going into next year, you'll have just 1 year of Tua on a contract. So there's some teams with a 3-year and a 4-year and a 2-year contract at quarterback. This team only has 3 total years of contract from the quarterback. So that was initially something I saw and was hesitant. Okay, that'll be a team lower. Man, though, I guess no longer Derrick Henry. So they one of the team's strength was actually the running back room. McCaffrey, Walker, Henry, that trio, pretty great. I think I named it best RB trio in the league, to be honest, in terms of points from this year. Certainly a good for a competitive team. Now you lose Henry, you get extra depth at wide receiver, but suddenly this is now a team that has a running back depth problem because there's only 4 running backs on the roster that I can see. McCaffrey, Ken Walker, Elijah Mitchell's one of them. So one of them is a pure handcuff, and then Dameon Pierce. So I guess the first thing I would say is maybe go get Jordan Mason, right, Geoff? Because I don't think
Yeah.
I saw Jordan Mason. So then you get both handcuffs at least. Like you want that extra insurance. Let me see. What did I put for notes? I think the one thing with McCaffrey though, and I was surprised how many 4-year contracts I saw on running backs. Now, some of the names made sense, and I think McCaffrey might. I know I just won McCaffrey in my RSO startup auction earlier this offseason, and I put him on a 3-year contract, and I was still uncomfortable with that. I ideally wanted to just be 2 years, but it was again one of those things where the bidding was getting to a point where I decided to up it for a year to lower the cap hit and get to an amount that I wanted to be at. So even I thought like 3 years, I'll do it, but I'm still slightly uncomfortable with it. 4 years, that kind of does make me uncomfortable on McCaffrey, I will say at this point. So giving your big, massive 4-year contract to a running back at that age is kind of a scary thing. As much as I love McCaffrey and I love what it does to this running back room, there's also maybe some, if things go wrong with McCaffrey in the next couple of years, this is going to be, big dead cap if you have to release him, if it gets that bad where you want out of him. So that's just the one scary thing about this team. I would have preferred if you give the longer term contract to Tua, at least you get that stability at quarterback, and go with shorter term on McCaffrey. Any shorter though might have pushed the cap hit up to the point where you wouldn't be again able to make this trade for Amon-Ra. So I think the way that's worked out is now, okay, you've got Harrison, you've got Amon-Ra, you've got McCaffrey, you've got several long-term pieces with stability. It's just find out long-term answer at quarterback. I think that's kind of the scary thing, which, sorry, Brian, is why I put him outside the top 5. I know you seem to like the team. There's a couple of quick drops they can make. Again, minimum players, so there's no cap hit on cutting them. It's Jalen Hyatt and Taysom Hill. In some leagues, I see the viability of Taysom Hill, but I think one thing I've been saying about Taysom Hill a lot is check the eligibility. Because when he's tight end eligible, his weekly ceiling is up there. The floor sucks, but the floor sucks for most tight ends, so it doesn't matter. But if you have to play Taysom Hill as a quarterback, I think he is utterly useless because he doesn't have the floor of any other starting quarterback. And yet his ceiling is what? Like, okay, he scores 3 touchdowns. And I don't expect him to get many pass attempts. So it's like, okay, 3 touchdowns and 80 rushing yards. We're talking 25 points. For a quarterback, that's a pretty good week. But quarterback ceilings are in they score 5 touchdowns. Or, Jalen Hurts scores 3 rushing touchdowns. He's scoring in the 30 points. So his floor is the worst floor of any quarterback. And the ceiling still doesn't quite match the elite guys like it would at tight end, where his ceiling does match. RSO is one of those formats that is, I think, has taken away tight end eligibility for Taysom Hill. So I know you had him, Geoff, listed on the spreadsheet as a tight end, but if you look on this sheet, he's listed as a quarterback and there's no tight end listing. So I'm pretty sure Taysom Hill, and Andrew's saying it too. So Hill is only a quarterback in RSO. So he's essentially useless. It means this team has a third quarterback, but it's also not a quarterback you want. And he's on a minimum contract, though. So it's simple. Just cut Taysom Hill. You don't have a cap penalty for it. I think those 2 moves, just cut Taysom Hill, cut Jalen Hyatt. That'll allow you to pick up 2 extra running backs. You at least get to 6 running backs that way.
Yeah, good call. And I had this team at the lowest. Obviously, when they had Derrick Henry, Kirk Cousins, Christian McCaffrey, this team seemed a little bit on the older side. It seemed like it was a team that needed to win this year, because Derrick Henry's only got a couple years left, Christian McCaffrey, Kirk Cousins. So the trade, did help him in that sense. He got a little bit younger with Brian Thomas Jr. Matthew Stafford's still an older quarterback, but that's why I had him at 11. I do think that the trade did help him in a sense. I think the trade was good on both sides. So that's why I had him.
Sorry, Geoff, I was curious to see, Brian, would you change your ranking of number 5 based on this trade now?
I mean, I'm visual with that kind of thing. I would want to see it in front of me, but I think when I look at what I ding them for was a little too much storage of value in top heavy running backs, and you got rid of them in Henry. So that's good. You've added Amon-Ra instead of Ayuk. I mean, that's an improvement. But it sounds like you and you got a young wide receiver in BTJ. I don't know, but it sounds like you added some. If the other dude got rid of $6 million, then you got dinged somewhere. So I don't know. And also just looking at my notes, like we said, there's some flatness here. I might switch them, even before the trade with the team I ranked 6th or 7th. It's close. Yeah.
Close. Yeah. Agreed. All right. Let's get to team number 8.
Number 8.
Number 8 is the only team that all three of us agreed upon. We all ranked this team at 8. It is Gang Green. And Brian, this is your squad.
Yeah, perhaps with the team name of Gang Green, they are unfortunate enough to be a Jets fan, but that is not a dig because I know your pain. I grew up a Jets fan in the 80s, the Ken O'Brien, Freeman McNeil, Al Toon days of the New York Jets. So, all right, let's see, Gang Green. I ranked you 8th as well. We have several quarterback rooms in this league that I would call risky/thin, and I think this is one of them, but better for real by a good amount than some of the other, I think, riskier thin ones. So you've got Dak, who I like, but it's like we think Dak is perpetually like 28 years old. He's already 31. We don't know what's up with his real life contract with Dallas at the moment, and I think ceiling wise, I'm not sure what it is anymore. With him, he's going to throw a ton. So, still like him, but, I'd like to see one of like my top 8 or so studs if I can get one. Baker is competent, but, with Canales gone, I don't know, if we love him as much as we did during his resurgent year last year. I'm bigger on May than consensus. Sounds like he did pretty well in the preseason game that I did not watch. But again, you're looking at 2 rookies with May and JJM. And of course, JJM is out for the season, which, obviously we got this, before that happened. And, it's hard to ding you for that now. But, when I look at that quarterback room, there's not much going on after Dak that I'm excited about. Your running backs are solid, just not the type of guys that I love. And I think there's too few of them. Ramondre's fine. Swift is fine. I like Monty more than most people do when you look at the running back usage on the Lions. Plus, if there was ever a Gibbs injury, you're talking about running back 1 production there. Chuba's fine, and he's going to probably be better early season with Brooks. Zeke is not fine, and so nothing really. I need some more juice, need some bigger upside in that running back room. Wide receivers, after your top 2 or 3, I don't love. You've got Tyreek, obviously elite, but, also 30. DJ Moore, very good. Love him, but look what happened to DJ Moore. Hey, DJ, here's the greatest quarterback you ever played with. Awesome. Great. Thank you. Oh, DJ, here's also Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze and Gerald Everett and DeAndre Swift. So, there's some murkiness there right now. But we love the talent. T. Higgins, what if he's fancy Mike Williams? What if he goes to, be somebody's 1A and he's not a wide receiver 1, on somebody for fantasy purposes or maybe even NFL purposes. Curtis Samuel, probably underrated, but, a capped ceiling there. Gabe is fine. You do have the original Mike Williams, not just the fancy one, but age and injury. And then you have Michael Wilson, who I think is solid and underrated in some respects. But I wonder about the pecking order in that offense with Marvin Harrison Jr., with Dortch, with James Conner getting fed. So, and then very solid tight ends. You have the 2 TKs, Travis Kelce and Tucker Kraft. Obviously,
that's where the similarities end between those 2.
Yes,
that's and obviously age you have there with Kelce and Kraft working his way back from an injury, but you do seem to have good cap space. So what I would need from this roster to really move further along and what would I want to see to take it over as an orphan? I want to move Tyreek and or Kelce and break those 2 big old pieces into more, whether that's freeing up cap space, whether that's, getting higher upside running backs, whether that's solidifying the quarterbacks that are underneath Dak. Like there's a few small holes, right? But there's a few of them. And I think, the assets that I would trade first if I took this team over would be Tyreek and Kelce.
Yeah, good points. Kyle, anything you wanted to add to this team before we get to the next one?
Well, I was going to say, it's funny that this was one of the teams I had the hardest time ranking, and yet it's the one team we all agreed on, which isn't always a given. Like for anyone listening to do PLPs, there will often be episodes where there's no unanimous ranking, and typically when it happens, it's usually a 12 because we all think, oh my god, that's easily the worst team, or we all like, okay, we all in love with this team. This is clearly the number one. We all rank them there. For the 8 to all be the same, that's unusual, but I think it just speaks to this league. And my confusion with it is, I mean, this is the team with the most cap space, 28.1 million. So they can go out and do whatever they want, essentially, in terms of like they can buy players without limitations. They don't need to give a certain amount back in terms of, oh, okay, the complicated formulas. Okay, I want this player's worth this. I'm willing to give it. Oh, but it doesn't make work for cap. So I've got to now give you this player. So what are you going to give me in return? That can get where things can get complicated. This team could be easily able to make trades. They have this much cap space because they got such good values on certain contracts. The Dak Prescott contract, 3 years, $45 million total for a starting quarterback, like averaging $50 million per year in this league. It's insane. It's honestly maybe the best value contract across the entire league. And that might actually be the best weapon to trade, because some of these teams that are stuck against the cap, Dak is still a good enough quarterback that if you want to upgrade a QB, what you're doing is you're absorbing a lot of cap space by doing it. So those other teams, they might be willing to make that move off of the elite tier quarterback to Dak Prescott to save some cap space. So the cost to go from Dak up to one of those elite players, it's not what you normally would see in a dynasty. It might be a lot less. So that can facilitate things. So that might actually be one of the best weapons to sell.
That's a really good point, because I think CJ Stroud was what, 43 million, and
yeah,
you got Dak at
right,
14 million. That's a pretty hefty discount there for sure.
CJ had it almost 53 million, 52.8.
Yeah,
on an average. So I think this year it's probably just under 50 million. It's in the 40s for sure. So that could be something to do. I guess I like this team. It's confusing because it feels like they've got, like, again, Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, as Brian mentioned. Maybe that is maybe a good reason to sell them, because they've also got a couple of rookie quarterbacks. So are they going long term? Are they, going for win now? It seems like they're almost like caught in the middle. I guess the one thing I didn't see, unless there was a trade made at some point before we got the sheet, but after the auction was done, they only used 1 4-year contract. So now I wonder, could the Dak contract be even cheaper if you would stretch that to a 4-year deal? And without another 4-year contract, there was nothing really preventing that. So I feel like they maybe have even let some meat on the table. Like they could even maybe have even more cap space and make this Dak contract even more valuable, and like people eyeing it for the dollar amount. So yeah, I was kind of, at times I had them lower than 8, at times I had them higher. Like eventually it settled here. We all settled in the middle on it, but just some interesting moves. I do think what Brian talked about, trying to sell Kelce, trying to sell Hill, I think it's at least worth exploring. Try and build this longer term window. And again, maybe Dak getting to a younger quarterback. That's 3 kind of moves that you can make to get younger, and that can long term build success.
Yeah, and Matthew chimes in the chat. I guess he's the owner of this team, and he says he's like Jerry Jones. He'd rather tank the season than to ever pay Dak. So I like it. All right, let's get to number 7.
Number 7.
Number 7 is another team with a lot of disparity. We got is ranked as high as 10 and as high as 4 and as low as 10, and it is Taddy Mason. Kyle, this is your squad.
So I would say if you're looking just from a dynasty perspective, you'd have to say this is probably the best QB room. Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, Deshaun Watson. And then what you're paying them, I mean, Watson's contract's not bad. It's just 2 years. But I do wonder if, like, could you get cheaper? Because we saw some very cheap quarterback contracts, like 1 year, just a couple million, or even some minimum contracts. Because this is a team that's 2.4 million in cap space, so it's not restrictive. Again, anything as long as you have $1 million, it feels like you're not restricted. It just might be tougher to make trades, for instance. But feels like that's one way they could potentially save money is trying to find a way to move off Watson for an even cheaper quarterback. Now, what you're probably doing is you're lessening the quality of your QB3. So what is that like? What are you adding on the other end? Is that draft pick? Is that another starter somewhere? Maybe go to the teams that we're talking are really thin at quarterback to where they would be getting Watson as their QB2. So it's a great trio of quarterbacks. To actualize that value, though, it might happen through a trade. Because unlike, typical dynasty leagues, you've got these quarterbacks forever. Deshaun Watson, you've got him this year and next year on this cheap contract, and then he's back to free agency. I mean, you could tag him, but then that's where that gets really expensive, and you're suddenly spending so much money on 3 quarterbacks, which means you're spending a ton on a player is going to be a backup on any given week. So you maybe save yourself the headache of that decision later by selling Watson now. Is he a player that people want to buy? No. And his average is like just under 11 million, 10.8 million for an average. So 2 years, 21. It means like next year's cap hit might be as much as 12 million at the max. So it's still super cheap. So that might be a way to kind of make a move. I also think they're maybe spending too much at tight end. And this is another, I think I talked with this team with Bowers and Ferguson. You've got multiple, and that's why I actually loved the last team, the thing that the last team did, to why I almost wouldn't sell Kelsey, because I love building year to year at tight end in RSO. They're typically the position that actually the franchise tag costs less. So you don't mind having like tight ends on expiring contracts because the franchise tag typically tends to be cheaper. So you can more easily play year to year with tight end without it costing a ton, like say Washington did with Kirk Cousins, where they just kept tagging him in, like from a real NFL perspective.
Right.
At other positions, it's maybe not as damaging, but at quarterback especially, that really hurt them in terms of what they ultimately gave away a ton of flexibility in cap space. So I was rambling a lot, but all to say, like with the tight ends, you've got Kincaid on a 2-year deal and Pitts on a 2-year deal. So the same thing I was saying to that Bowers Ferguson team. I think especially looking at Pitts here, do you sell the hype on Pitts? And I think with Cade Otton and Michael Mayer on this team, you don't really even need to get that tight end back. So is there a team that's maybe super thin at tight end? They'd love to acquire Pitts without giving a tight end back. This might also be a way to do it. You've got Kincaid on the longer term contract, and then your backup tight ends you just play year to year. That could also be a way to save money. I imagine they'd rather sell Pitts, because actually one thing I noticed about this league, there's a lot of stacking going on. Like teams, like even from the first team, Jaden Daniels with Terry McLaurin. This is a team that Josh Allen stacked with Dalton Kincaid, and some people are doing it on longer term contracts as well. So I guess I was going to say the position you should actually target with Pitts is running back. Tajee Spears, Aaron Jones, Zamir White, Austin Eckler. Again, 4 guys. Like there's a lot of teams where the RB depth doesn't necessarily exist. I would even consider cutting Michael Mayer on his minimum contract. You don't have to worry about money. Even if you sell Pitts for a running back and you're just riding Kincaid and Cade Otton, I think that's fine. Cut Mayer for another running back, maybe sell Pitts for a running back. Again, then you get to that 6 number. So there's a lot of teams with like only 4 running backs, but just a couple of quick moves, they get to 6, and then that depth looks better.
All right. Yeah. Good call on all those points there. Anything you wanted to chime in real quick, Brian, here?
Well, I mean, not really. We do have the big disparity, between me and Kyle at 4 and 10. And I think it's just a matter in this case of he knows a little bit more about the salary stuff and the format and maybe some players as well, like that maybe I like a little less, or it's not the build that I like, or too many tight ends, or that sort of thing. I mean, there are some players on here that I love. Like I am the Tajee Spears hype train, and so.
And it's funny because I'm not so high on Tajee Spears. So I was a little surprised I knew Brian.
And Kyle Pitts is my dynasty tight end 1, and I love Kincaid. But it's like what I came away with this is your 2 most tradable assets are at a position that doesn't matter because it's not premium.
Yeah, but the tight end position, agreed.
Well, I mean, argue Josh Allen is a big contract, but I'm sure there's tons of teams would love to take it. But that's like the foundation of your team. Like you're building around the Allen and Keon Coleman and Kincaid stack. Like you're kind of building through those 3. So
yep, good call.
Suddenly, Pitts is the only guy. But yeah, like we've seen, like there was that one team that had Juwan Johnson, Jelani Woods on minimum contracts. They spent as little as possible as they could on tight end, and I do respect building that way. So some teams might not even be interested in Pitts because they might even just look at the contract and say, you know what, that's too much. I don't want to pay a tight end that. And like don't want to pay what it costs to trade for either. So
Yeah, good points. All right, let's get to team number 6.
Number 6.
Number 6 ranked as low as 6. I'm sorry, as low as 7, as high as 6. It is Hertz Donut. Brian, take it away.
I like that name. I'm not usually one for the pun names, but Hertz Donut. I don't know. I really like that. And I'm sitting on a donut right now at the moment.
does it hurt?
So, when we look at your quarterback group here, we've got Hertz and we've got Nix, and that's it, right? So, maybe that's a function of where you're spending and the length of the contracts and that sort of thing. But, Hertz obviously elite. I think he's my 5 right now, quarterback 5, right? And Nix probably, has a good floor in a Peyton system, but he's still a rookie, and you still only have 2 QBs in a super flex. So not something that I'm excited to see. Your running backs, again, are kind of thin overall and too few of them. Love Jonathan Brooks. I'm irrationally high when I rank Jonathan Brooks. He's my Dynasty running back 7. Kamara, I'm starting to come around a little bit just because how bad the vibes are on Kendre Miller. But, he's 29. His efficiency has declined year to year. You're pretty much only getting passing game work out of him for any real fantasy value. But again, vibes are bad on Kendre, and absent a trade or heavy Taysom Hill usage, you kind of have what you have. But he's old and essentially, untradeable, in a lot of leagues that don't have the salary cap. Ty Chandler, I love. I think he can have maybe a little bit of standalone, but, obviously huge contingent upside with if there's an Aaron Jones injury. Madison, just yeet Madison. Like, why is he even in the league anymore? But yeah. So you only have 4 of them, right? 2 of them are old and dusty, and one of those 2 is named Alexander Madison. Like, it's just not. And the one we love is out for the first few weeks of the season. So need some improvement there. Very good top 3 wide receivers, but definitely a mixed bag overall, especially after that. You've got Puka, who I think will regress, and I'm below consensus on a little bit. Devontae Smith, I'm pretty much right on market with him. And Amari Cooper certainly has bigger upside than his ADP and trade value this year. I think they're going to throw more. I think if Deshaun Watson is 70%, 75% of what he used to be, I think we'll be fine there. Mooney, he's getting some love because especially with the Rondale Moore injury, but he is Mooney, right? Like, I think he can be a solid-ish wide receiver too, but what's his role in that offense when we think about Bijan and Algier, when we think about London, when we think about Pitts? It's like, well, then there's Mooney, right? Bateman, I don't know, man. Like, Rashad Bateman, first-round draft capital, he hasn't turned 25 years old yet. Like, I want to believe, like, he's shown flashes, but he just, there's certain things that he just can't do as well as a first-round pick should, and he's just been injury-plagued, right? Javon Baker, big upside. He's been having some drops, but, I think is higher ceiling than Jalen Polk. But, we'll see. That's going to take a little while. Malachi Corley, I don't know. Like, I could see him getting, a lot of PPR points with some manufactured touches and things like that. Or I could see him, being the sort of, gadgety guy that doesn't get used much. And it's just the whole offense goes through Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall. Mingo, like one of the worst rookie wide receiver years we've ever seen when we think about the draft capital used on him. I mean, depth chart is what it is there, but it's Jonathan Mingo. Pop Douglas, I don't know what you're paying Pop Douglas, but it's probably a good value. I think he's going to be a safety valve for whatever quarterback is there, whether it's Brissett or May playing. You have Laporta, who I'm below consensus on, but is still, top 5 tight end and as many people's one. Chig, I don't know. I think the dream is over with Chig. I want to still believe, but, and we got, Levis who likes to chuck it, and we got the new coaching staff and OC there, but I don't know. He's not really a target earner. It's just, you can't really predict week to week, like, I don't even love him really in best ball anymore. So I don't know how much I'm rostering him in managed. And your cap space looks pretty good. So what would I do with this team? I want to add to the quarterbacks, both in number and quality. Again, you only have 2, Hurts and Nix. I want to get some of that juice at running back. and increase the numbers of your running backs. I like that 6-to-4 ratio, running back to wide receiver. So, make that work. And target a maybe perhaps better wide receiver one if you can in the process. But if you go into if you go into week to week with Puka as your one, it's not bad. And I think I would move off some of those unnecessary wide receivers. I don't know, how much cap space it fills up, or if you can get thirds for him or something. But like a Mingo and a Corley and a Javon Baker, you just kind of don't need that many. And I'd rather see some of the waiver wire running backs that were mentioned before. And I don't know if you saw my face with some of the names that are still on the waiver wire, but what are we doing, folks? Come on. So, definitely some potential, especially with the cap space, but needs some work.
Yeah, one thing I noticed, Kyle, and I'll ask your opinion on this. I have the clear, crisp screen, so I can see all the contracts on my screen. Y'all probably can't see it as clearly on your side, but this team has a ton of minimum contracts. Like his entire
More than half.
Yeah, more than half of his roster is minimum contracts. Talk about, is there an advantage to that? Is there a strategy to that, to having those many minimum contract guys, or what was his?
The advantage is you get to cut them for free. That's the biggest advantage these contracts do. And for some of these players, that's the best advantage because like Treylon Burks, Jonathan Mingo, Rashad Bateman, I think 3 easy cuts. Malachi Corley and Javon Baker, not going to lie, it's tempting to keep them just in case, they go off and you can extend them. But both of those guys are in minimum contracts. So the thinking is, if they don't produce this year, maybe their extensions are so cheap that that's how you get them long term. But I guess if you're also thinking that, why do you want to hold them for that long? So I can also even understand just straight up cutting Corley and Baker, because I doubt people give future draft picks for them if they know they're only going to be 1-year contracts. And I guess it depends. Are these, because some contract lengths for rookie contracts are 3 years, others are 4 years. That's up to the commissioner to decide. But certainly it's tough to say, okay, I'm giving up 4 years of contract just for this 1 year of this rookie only during his rookie season is tough. But yeah, if you're going to be cutting so many guys, maybe you could still hang on to Corley and Baker. And I guess the idea is this is a team that could be aggressive to trade because they can absorb so much. You have to leave the auction with whatever the roster max is, but that's nothing to say that once the auction's done, you can't just cut a bunch of these minimum players and have less roster spots. So if you, right now I think it's $14.4 million in cap space. If you trade for say $16 million worth of contracts and you cut 4 of these minimum contracts, that's where you can save the extra $2 million. Now you'd have 4 less roster or players than other teams. But if you're also getting elite assets, maybe you're less concerned with depth. And I guess, again, if you're cutting wide receiver depth, that's really not much of a concern. So there are 7 wide receivers on minimum contracts. And Demario Douglas, Darnell Mooney are probably the 2 most appealing when it comes to just single season value in terms of production. So you could realistically cut the other 5, pick up 5 running backs, and suddenly you get close to that ratio that Brian likes. Could even probably cut Chigozie Okonkwo, because the issue with 4-year contract on Sam Laporta, there's never a week you're benching Laporta for Okonkwo. I don't care if he's playing the 2020 Arizona Cardinals that just allowed everything to I think it was 2019 Cardinals, actually. That was they're the best matchup for tight ends. It was 2 touchdowns guaranteed. I don't care if Okonkwo's playing them. You're not benching Laporta for him. So
you might even start Laporta on his bye week over one of those other guys.
Well, that's the thing. You can probably just get you can hold Okonkwo till the bye week if you really want, and then just drop him after that. But you can also just drop him now and then wait till the bye week. And even if it's not Okonkwo, pick up a comparable tight end just for 1 week. So a lot of times in these RSO leagues, I'm just going with 1 tight end, and the bye week to replace them, I'll figure out, I'll pick up a guy that week. But so and again, if you're talking about wanting running back depth, you want to hang on to Chandler and Madison. Even as much as Madison's bad, at least he's a running back body, might get some pass catching work. So the other 8 minimum contracts can all be cut for running backs. Again, you might not want to cut Mooney and Douglas, so we'll take those 2 out. But that's still 6 minimum guys you could cut, add 6 running backs to this team. So that's going to be the case for a lot of teams, but especially this team, where it feels like like as Jonathan Brooks isn't performing early in the year, who's your RB2 going to be? So you might not be able to get that answer through just picking up guys. So there might have to be a trade that's also made at running back. Trade for a quarterback if you can trade for a running back. And then like Brian said, your third priority would be to upgrade that wide receiver 1 spot. And I doubt you're doing it just straight up trading them. You're probably going to have to give up a Puka or a Devontae Smith to make that upgrade happen. Devontae Smith might work because the contract's cheap enough that like the upgrades ahead of Smith are going to be so much more big cap hits that, again, like that could be the appeal of how a team moves off of that higher tier receiver. Okay, I'm still getting Devontae Smith, and he's on a 3-year contract that's fairly cheap. Like that's the appeal of how I'm willing to move off some of these really expensive guys, like potentially an Amon-Ra, let's say, who we just saw moved, right? We wouldn't see Amon-Ra as one of the first wide receivers moved after a startup draft, but again, the contract really dictated that one team needing the cap space so much that they were willing to move on from Amon-Ra.
Yeah, good stuff. And I think another thing too that, looking at, you keep saying, add running backs off the waiver wire, and something that me and Brian aren't really used to is these teams are a lot more shallow than dynasty leagues that we play in. Like there's guys on the waiver wire that would never be on our waiver wires in a regular dynasty league. So it is a little bit easier to drop those guys and go pick up some guys that could have some value. Like I mentioned before, some of those running backs, the Bucky Irvins and the Tyrone Tracy guys, and all those kind of guys they still have some value. So good points there. All right, we're getting into the top 4 now.
Number 4.
Number 4 team ranked as low as 10. Oh, I'm sorry, we're on 5, aren't we? Did I skip over?
I wasn't just giving you a high five. Yeah, we are on number 5.
Let me hit 5.
Good job.
Number 5.
There we go. That's the price of doing things live. All right, so ranked as high as 2 and as low as 12. And Kyle, you had this team at 12. So me and Brian, I think Brian had him at 2. I had him at 4. So give me your thoughts here. Why do you have him at 12?
It's funny because I think I understood some of the other ones. Like, yeah, I'm really going with the contracts. Not gonna lie, guys, I was surprised you guys like this team so much because it starts with the quarterback. And yeah, it's not as thin as the team with Daniels and O'Connell. I'd much prefer that QB room because you have Jaden Daniels as opposed to Bryce Young, Justin Fields. Those are like that's your quarterback room next year. And you've got Aaron Rodgers and Will Levis on 1-year contracts this year. None of that really sounds that appealing. Like there are risks with Daniels for sure, but I think that was my initial thing. That's why this is the only team that's in my mind worse than that Jaden Daniels team is because at least you've got Jaden Daniels. You've at least got like what looks like a solid QB1 solution for the long term. We're really banking on Bryce Young. Now it's super cheap. It's 2 years, $6 million. Like, man, the hate on Bryce Young because if we were doing this auction last year, he's going for so much more than that. So he's cheap. It's also just 2 years. So what are you getting at quarterback? And I think that's the biggest thing for me is, this is a really scary QB room. I kind of like they have Justin Fields on a longer term deal, even though it's just an extra year, because he might be more productive. We might get more clarity with Fields next season. So that might be your QB1 next year. So it's Rodgers this year in theory, and then Fields next year. But then there's still a lot of ifs on both of those guys, a lot of question marks. So like really, you could say like every wide receiver they have is really good, and they've only got 6. So it's the type of build we like, I think, in theory, Brian, is we don't love, like you and I agree on this, and this isn't just an RSO thing, just in Dynasty in general. There's too many like back-end receivers on teams. Like you want your 6, 7, maybe 8 receivers solid that you like. These are all guys you can trust in your lineup, and then all these depth guys that you're kind of just waiting on, they almost serve no purpose. You'd much rather depth at running back, and like because those guys that their value can suddenly increase or their role can suddenly change drastically. So only having 6 receivers is good. There's a bit more. I guess this one's even 6 running backs, 6 receivers, if I'm counting it right. But weird sense to use the 4-year contracts on running backs. And we've talked about it with other guys. Like I think we saw the Breece Hall team already. That was a 4-year deal on Breece, pretty expensive. We talked about it with McCaffrey. It's questionable, but to go 4 years on Blake Corum is a really interesting strategy, and I can understand the appeal because it's so cheap. And so, like we saw the team with Dak, like their 4-year contract, they used it on Drake May, and it became super cheap. In this case, use a 4-year contract on Corum, but man, 4 years on Corum, 3 years on Kyron, like a lot of the future contracts on 2 running backs that you're really handcuffing. I really didn't like that kind of structure for the team. Whereas would have preferred, maybe not going for Kyron. That helps save a bit of money to go get a better quarterback on the 4-year deal. So it seems like they spent a lot of money at wide receiver, especially Collins, Waddle, Olave. Like all three of those guys are pretty expensive. You save a little bit with Collins because it's a 4-year deal, but still Waddle, Olave above 40 million. So it might be it's tough to do now because it's like to move these receivers for quarterbacks are going to be tough to do. But in the auction, instead of one of those top 3, I would have preferred using that money on quarterback. So I feel like I don't like the way the team is structured, and it's also tough to see the path out. Like, what are you getting at quarterback? And this is a team that's you're going to have to give something back. You're probably going to have to give one of those top 3 receivers in a trade for a quarterback. It feels like you're not maximizing their value because of their contract situations. They might almost end up being like not throw-ins, but you're going to have to add a lot in value in draft picks to move from those receivers to a quarterback, and you're probably gonna have to throw a quarterback back. The quarterbacks you have, they weren't that great, so I wouldn't worry too much there. But that is ultimately the problem, I think, and why I rank them 12. I see a lot of work to do, and it's tough to see the obvious path on what to do. I do like that no long-term contracts on tight end. 1 year George Kittle, 1 year Dallas Goedert. Figure it out next year. Again, the franchise tag at tight end tend to be the cheapest because like a guy like Kelsey, in a lot of years, I see he's on 1 year contract. So like his cap hit isn't impacting the franchise tag amount from next year. So I like, tight ends on 1 year contracts, but I've also talked about, if this is a team that's looking for a multi-year contract on tight end and you want to flip to like some of those other teams talked about, Bowers and Ferguson, Kincaid and Pitts, like if those teams want to flip one of their multi-year contracts to a 1 year, this is one of the teams ideally to do it because they've got 2 guys on 1 year deals that like they're startable, especially Kill, but certainly Goddard fits that too. But yeah, this quarterback room, I just can't get past it. I love Justin Fields probably more than most, but for him to be like the premier piece of your quarterback room next year is super scary. And even Rodgers this year as the premier piece is super scary, not knowing what he's going to do coming off the Achilles.
Yeah, I'll be completely honest with you. I'm looking at the team and why I ranked them at 4. And I'm guessing because they had a lot of in the middle that I liked outside of the quarterbacks, a lot of younger guys like, Jalen Waddle. I like JSN, Chris Olave. But, Nico Collins is a guy that I'm really high on. And maybe somehow I got blind to the fact that the quarterback room is so shallow. But Brian, real quick, because you had him at 2. I'm curious to what you saw.
There are things I don't like about the team. Like I don't love the quarterback room, and I wouldn't handcuff my own running back. And there are some players that I'm met on. But like when I look at the overall build, the roster construction, the ratios, those are those magic ratios that I love. And when you have the wide receivers in that ratio, like Waddle and Nico, who I like love both of those, that and I just happen to like that quarterback room more than the Jaden Daniels AOC one. I'm not.
4 is better than, even if it's like you like Daniels better than any individual.
Yeah,
I'm not. 4 of them is better than the fact there's 1.5.
I'm like I want AOC below all 4 of those quarterbacks. You know what I mean? So like, and again, I'm not a Levis guy, but I also wasn't looking at like, oh well, you only have Levis 1 year and Fields is your quarterback next year. I'm just looking at the roster.
Right.
And like if I want to re-sign Levis next year, I will. He's my quarterback. If that frees up, contract space to go trade for a more expensive quarterback, fine. But yeah, so that's kind of where I was at with that. Yeah.
All right.
I will say enough. Like, okay, Rodgers on 1 year, both of the tight ends on a 1 year deal. Like Singletary's like 16.5 this year. And Ridley and Downs, like all these guys. Jerome Ford, you're paying $12 million. Robinson, $9 million. So there's a lot of like bigger contracts on 1 year. So next year in the auction, they will have a bit more power, and maybe that's how they have to go get that quarterback. Is like next year, instead of spending $13 million on Kittle, I guess Goddard's only $5 million. That's pretty cheap.
Also, I think Bryce is going to be cromulent. He's going to be adequate to maybe even above average. It's going to be short and intermediate, but like. With
his passing, I thought you meant him. Okay,
yeah. With the offensive line changes, with the better weapons around him, at least a little bit with Canales as a coach, with Jonathan, I just think overall they're not going to be as bad, and Bryce isn't going to be as bad. So that's part of it too.
And on this contract, if you can get even just even below average quarterback play, and you're only paying $3 million a year for it, like that's kind of how you can win in the format if the rest of your team is solid. Again, I think the one thing about this wide receiver room, again, there's not too many of them, but it's balanced, right? Okay, you've got an older guy with Ridley, but then you've got a couple of rookies last year in JSN and Downs, and those 3 like prime age productive guys. So it's a balanced wide receiver room without having too many pieces, and really no one I would consider a roster clogger. So
Yeah,
I get that appeal of it.
good stuff. All right, now we're getting into the top 4.
Number 4.
Number 4 team ranked as high as 3, as low as 10. It is Frank Fund's North Park Funland. Say that 3 times fast. Brian, this is your team.
If someone can put in the chat, is that a South Park reference? Is that the amusement park that Eric Cartman buys and takes over? And I don't know. It kind of sounds like maybe it would be. Anyway,
North Park, South Park. Yeah, you're right. That might be it. I'll look that up.
His avatar looks like a South Park character. So it looks like
there you go.
Is.
All right. So the quarterbacks are solid. Kyler and T-Law, the latter of whom I probably am a little above consensus on, are both top 10 dynasty quarterbacks for me. And Penix, who I'm a little lower on coming out of college than some other people, he's in a solid spot, with an older and Achilles quarterback in front of him, and he's fine. If he has to play for a couple of weeks with Cousins out or something, he'll be okay. So your quarterback room is overall solid. I'm not going to nitpick that, I like to have 4 quarterbacks, because sometimes it's just not. Why bother taking that 4th quarterback if that 4th quarterback is, I don't know, Gardner Minshew, right? And when you can get like a depth running back, the running backs are solid overall. Some of them are meh, and there's probably, again, overall too few of them. I like to have a deeper running back group. Rashad White, I just happen to just loathe. Like, the only reason I have him as dynasty running back 16 is a capitulation to volume and a little pass catching. Like he is the most boring, inefficient, unsexy, dead zoney, but good production running back that we have. And it's a personal thing. I just can't. I just hate Rashad White. Tony Pollard, I think he bounces back and is a little bit more like he was late season last year. But he is in a timeshare, and he is in an offense that is a little bit questionable. And at the same time, since I'm the Tajay Spears hype train, I have to think that I'm going to ding Pollard a little bit. And of course, we're looking at age too. Chase Brown, explosive. Some people think he's really ready to do something big this year. I'm split on that. There's certainly reasons for optimism in his explosion, and I think he was clocked at second fastest ball carrier last year. But he did a lot of it on a few big plays, and his 1 year of workhorse college stuff was his 5th year senior. I don't know, and he was getting ragdolled in pass pro at the Senior Bowl. But word is from the coach he was working with, Yoshivas went down to work with this wide receiver coach, Drew Lieberman, and said, Chase Brown, come down with me. And apparently he is running great routes now and stuff like that. So something to keep an eye on for sure, especially when it's just Zach Moss besides him. And then we have Charb, who is one of my favorite 1Bs / 2As. When I do a 0 running back build, love him. And Chubb, listen, I would love for Chubb to be something. I'm okay being wrong on a 29-year-old running back in December, coming off his 2nd catastrophic knee injury. Nothing would make me happier than Chubb doing it this year, but I'm okay being wrong. He's kind of I have him 34 spots below ECR in dynasty rankings. So he's pretty much off my board. Looking at the wide receiver room, no studs, but we've got some good guys there. We've got Flowers and Rice, 2 second-year guys who, I can make the case are a little more manufactured and dependent on those sorts of things than some other folks like to say, and also have strong competition, but again do have upside. Addison, very much upside, but we have the quarterback uncertainty there. And, of course, we have the possible suspension for the DUI, although I think that's probably going to get held up and not happen for a while. And then, of course, he just hurt his ankle. Pickens is kind of like Rashad White for me. It's a personal thing. I hate George Pickens. people who are high on George Pickens, I can't stand it. Like, he's not like, I probably hate him too much, but like, he's not some kind of alpha, he's a big play guy. He's a better and best ball guy. Just not a big fan. He doesn't really separate well. It irritates me that people think he's going to be like a top 12, 14 wide receiver this year. Deontay Johnson's going to get some quiet PPR points for you. A lot of people are tagging Judy as a breakout. Some of the data shows that when you're drafted at a certain age with certain draft capital and you go on your second team, sometimes that's what clicks for you. And Judy fits that pattern and that model. Some people are calling for a Judy breakout. I'm sure he wasn't expensive. Pearsall's a good stash. Leggett, don't love him as a prospect, but when we were talking about that Carolina offense before, this is a guy. He doesn't really run refined routes, right? But they're going to find ways to get him the ball because he's athletic. So expect some short passes and gadgety stuff from Bryce Young. So you've got some upside and some juice there. Tight ends are very solid with Andrews and Njoku. Those would be 2 top 10 dynasty tight ends for me. And it looks like you got pretty good cap space. So a lot could go right with this team, but a lot could go wrong with this team. When I say, okay, what if, Kyler doesn't take that next step to be like an elite quarterback? What if Trevor Lawrence's inconsistency keeps showing up? What if, Pollard is completely outshined by Tyjae Spears? What if, the inefficient Rachaad White finally cedes touches to guys like Bucky Irving and Sean Tucker? Like, what if Flowers and Rice really have their ceiling capped because of like the competition around them and the type of routes they're being asked to run? Like, and then when we look at, some like a couple of your best guys like Andrews and Njoku, they're at the position that doesn't matter. So, I would take some of that like value that you have stored in Rachaad White and Pollard, and I would take at least one of them and tear down, break it up into multiple pieces. I want to see more juice, more upside. More total running backs in your running back group. See if somebody likes Chubb. And I would try to get a higher end wide receiver as well. That might even be a higher priority than the running back depth because you could get by maybe with Rachaad White and Pollard and have that value stored there. Okay, fine. You're not going to have a Brian Ford 0 RB room, but I wouldn't want Flowers or Rashee Rice or Addison or Pickens as to call them my wide receiver 1.
Yeah, that's a really good call because you're right. It's scary to have those 4 guys as your top 4 guys because all of them could, not be what we hope that they could be in their ceiling.
And what you could do
for
that wide receiver 1 is you don't even have to have a longer term wide receiver 1 is get a guy on a 1-year deal that you think will outproduce all of them this year, even if it's an older player, and just kind of say, okay, this year, this is my wide receiver 1. And then maybe next year, Pickens or Flowers or Rice emerge this year to where next year you feel more confident with them. So you can address that wide receiver 1 spot without having to go elite long-term commitment. This team's got, I think it's
14.7. Yep.
One of the bigger ones. So, and like, that's okay. You can absorb just a 1-year contract this year. You've got the cap space for it, and then it doesn't affect future cap. So maybe whatever the Venn diagram is of who are wide receiver, like who's a wide receiver you trust as your wide receiver 1, and who are wide receivers on 1-year contracts. There might be some players that fit into that. There might not be a ton, but those would be the first targets to start with.
All right, good stuff. Let's get to team number.
I was going to say the reason I was so low on this team is I don't like how they distributed the 4-year and 3-year contracts relative to the 1-year. Like, I hate that Jordan Addison is on a 1-year contract. Now he's hurt. There's all this concern. He's going to have Sam Darnold the whole year. Like, it really feels like you want Jordan Addison on a multi-year contract because you want to have access to him in different seasons, not just this year. Only having him this year, the tag amount for him is going to be so high that you probably are just going to let him walk unless the extension amount in season isn't high because let's say this injury is more serious than we thought and he's not playing. Like, that could be an advantage. But for the most part, I'd rather have Addison on the multi-year deal and not because they've got Chubb on 3-year contract and Rachaad White on a 4-year contract. Not gonna lie, when I first saw that, I was almost like, this team's gonna be like 12 for me because I would absolutely hate to have Rachaad White for 4 more years like locked into this contract. the cap hits aren't ridiculous, but it feels like because they had cap space this year, it would have been smarter to use only not use the 4-year deal on White, use the 4-year deal on Addison and just sign White for 1 year even, or like find a way to not have it be White your 4-year guy. So that's why I was not as high on this team. And again, you've got multiple tight ends for multiple seasons. I really don't love that overlap. One guy on multiple years and then one guy on 1 year is how I'd prefer to play it. So having both Njoku and Andrews, like Brian said earlier, it's like the two strengths of the team. And it's the position that probably matters the least. Like, what real value does David Njoku have? Like, what can you go out and buy for him? Because that would be the first thing I'd look at. Like, okay, just build through Andrews and, yeah, try and improve from there. At first, I didn't love the Lawrence Murray QB room, but the more I've talked myself into it, like, that's a really good duo. You get them for longer-term years. So I did raise them a little bit in the rankings. 10th, so not that much. But, yeah, that Rachaad White on 4 years and Nick Chubb on 3 years, I saw that and, ooh, boy.
When
scary.
you add that to it, I would. There's no way I would have them at 4.
Yeah.
Rachaad White survived 2 drafts, right? He survived last year's draft. Everyone thought, he's going to get replaced immediately. And the same thing this year. So far, we think we survived. I know Brian would say no. Bucky Irving's easily going to replace him, but for the intents and purposes, they didn't draft another day 2 running back to match him. They've gone with day 3 guys 2 years in a row. Does he survive 3 drafts in a row next year? Like, as early as next year, you might be thinking it's not great on the White contract, and you still have 3 like that next season and then 2 years additionally. So that's why I rank them low. It's just to build around these contracts. But again, some of these 4-year contracts on running backs make sense. Breece Hall, Bijan, for sure. McCaffrey, I understand. Blake Corum, because it's so cheap, I can understand too. But like $100 million contract for Rachaad White, 4 years, that's one of the worst contracts in the league, I think.
That's tough. Yeah, that's something that you definitely would have saw that me and Brian would not have seen.
Not a Funland ride with him, I don't think. And by the way, I looked up just because Brian was asking at first. Apparently, there's a Frankie's Fun Park in North Carolina. So
interesting.
that's the first thing that came up. And then the results say, oh, yeah, it's the South Park thing. But, is this a real place? Not quite, but yeah, almost.
All right, let's get to the top 3.
Number 3.
All right, number 3 team ranked as high as 1, as low as 7. And this team name, I think, is probably the most common team name in all the PLPs that we do. Chalupa Batman is the team number 3. And Kyle, this is your team, and you had this team at 1.
Yeah, Christopher Benjamin, congratulations. You've been born as the number 1 team coming out of the startup auction. Again, the league reference there. But like the first things, okay, yeah, one team we talked about earlier, the studs and scrubs style, like you've spent a lot on a few top-end guys. But, man, to have Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson, I know there's only 2 quarterbacks in this team. You'd love to get a third. But to have those 2 and the average amount, like cap hit per year for them is less than 40 million each of them. So you've got 2 quarterbacks, you're locked in on them. But there are also, like, we're talking CJ Stroud's, his average is like 53 million per year. So to get, like, I calculated Mahomes' average as 34.9 million over a 4-year deal, and Lamar 32 million over a 3-year deal per year. So like to get 2 quarterbacks locked in like that, and also different years, right? So like, as those contracts expire, choosing who to extend, who to tag. It's one of those things where I kind of like that it's offset, like Lamar in the 3-year, Mahomes in the 4-year. So you're not having to make the decisions on both of them the same season. I love that QB duo. I think it's the best QB duo in the league, and you've got them locked up long-term, and it's not overly expensive. So right off the get-go, I saw that and I thought, wow, this team is definitely going to be up there for me. I think I'm definitely going to have it among, I ultimately ended up being number 1. The Jefferson contract's expensive, but that's what you got to do to pay for these elite players. 4 years, $217 million, a lot of money. But then you look at like the Amon-Ra contract, which is $66 million per year. This is about $12 million per year less on average. So especially for these first 2 years of this, it's going to be significantly cheaper than say what Amon-Ra is making. So while you're paying for an elite receiver, you're still not technically paying the top tier price of receiver. So like it's not a bad contract for Jefferson. Like it's the cost of business to go get elite players. So I love building around those 3. Mahomes, Lamar, Jefferson. If we're doing a dynasty startup, you can't possibly get that. And that's why I love auction drafts and RSO. This is the only way you could get that coming out of a startup is through this type of format, because there's no way you're paying enough to get up there and like get all three of those players. So I love building around those three. I love the tight end room. It's one guy on 1 year deal. Perfect. And it's Evan Ingram. I think he meets the threshold of difference maker just barely. But it's also the advantage is you're paying Ingram like half of what Kelsey's making, way more than half of what Laporte is making. So you're getting access to what could be a difference-making tight end without truly paying the price. So I absolutely love that. Neighbors is a 2. That's great. Hollywood is a 3. Long-term is good. But then there's also this year, Mike Evans and Stephon Diggs. This, older productive receivers, but on 1 year contracts, which is exactly what you want to do with them. Think you go in, try and win with them this year. And then, longer term, you build around Jefferson, you build around Neighbors. 8 running backs. I'm pretty sure this is the team with the most running backs. Now, the advantage is half of them are 1 year deals. So as early as next year, you'll only have 4, but that also gives roster spot flexibility to go and maybe add, like for these older running backs, you maybe want to just be going like on a James Conner. You love that he's on a 1 year contract. Use him this year, and then next year there's no commitment. If he ends up in a good spot, you can then go try and bid on him in the auction. But like you don't have this obligation to pay him long term. The Barkley contract on 3 years, it's expensive. You're actually paying him more per year than Mahomes and Lamar. So I guess that's the one thing about that is, okay, the Barkley contract's expensive. But this is a team that can definitely like turn running back depth into like a better RB2. Can you sell 2 of these guys to get 1 on some of those teams where running back depth is a really big problem? They're dealing with only 4 running backs. You've got twice as much on this team. Can you use that to the advantage? I think I said everything I needed to. If you can, try and get a third QB for safety. But ultimately, if you've got to go into a season with just Mahomes and Lamar, I feel pretty confident in that duo.
Yeah,
enough to have them as the number 1 team. So
he chimed in the chat too. 1 year deals. He probably has the best cap space for next year as well. So you could build on this team pretty well.
Yeah, because you think of like Evans is 22 million, Diggs 19 million, Ingram 11.5 million. Like, so when these guys aren't in the books anymore, that's a lot of cap space opening up that you can use to try and rebuy them or go for a more elite asset at some point. But yeah, I think I would love to take over that foundation. Just Mahomes, Lamar alone. And you tell me you get Jefferson too.
Yeah,
I think I can do a lot with that team with just those 3 contracts.
Good stuff. All right, let's get to team number 3.
Number 3.
I'm sorry, that was team number 3. I got my numbers mixed up. We're at team number 2, aren't we?
Yes.
Number 2.
Number 2 team ranked pretty flat here. High is 2, low is 3. It is Saving Matt Ryan. And Brian, this is your team.
Yeah, Geoff, you're getting tired there with the numbers. And another South Park reference for number 2. Don't ever call me number 2. So saving Matt Ryan, I probably don't like your quarterback group as much as some other folks would, which is maybe why I was 3 instead of 2. Obviously love Caleb. I have him ranked aggressively compared to some folks I talk to. Big ceiling. He's a rookie. There's going to be some volatility. Jordan Love, I think, is a better NFL quarterback than fantasy quarterback. I think he tends to be a little overrated in some fantasy circles, but I would certainly be fine with him as my quarterback too. And Russ is Russ. Yeah, I mean, he may lose the job to Fields. He may, play poorly. I don't know. Like the bounce back case is a pretty narrow chunk of his range of outcomes this year, I think. So your running backs are solid, and we have a pretty good amount of them. We obviously have Bijan at the top. We all love elite. My dynasty RB1. I love Jaylen Warren. I have him ranked pretty aggressively at 17 in dynasty-wise. Mostert, old, right, 32, but, was productive, and he's in a good offense. And depending on what that contract is in this format, you might be able to absorb it for a little while. It's just not the type of player that I would want on my roster.
Just 2 years for that contract, by the way.
Benson is high upside for sure. But, we certainly are going to see Connor eat. We've also heard talk that Michael Carter and DeMarcado are going to get the third down passing work, at least to start out. So, his path is getting narrow. I'm a little afraid that Braylon Allen's getting so much buzz. Like I heard somebody today say he's clearly far better than Blake Corum. And I believe there's probably better dynamism and upside there. But his college tape looks like Tarzan, plays like Jane. He angled himself into contact. Like, sure, okay, he's 6 for 54 in the preseason game against, second stringers and stuff on defense. Like, on a defense that's already bad. Like, I don't know. But at the same time, listen, he's one Breece Hall ankle away from, a pretty good workload. So, I would probably like to maybe move off Mostert for something younger, but not a bad running back room from the way that I build. I might like to see 1 or 2 more in total, though, as well. Solid overall wide receivers, but you've got some risk, some uncertainty, and possibly the lack of a stud, at least for now, until we know what Rome Odunze turns out to be. Jaden Reed, we were talking about him before the show. I think he has a low ceiling compared to Wicks, but especially Watson. At the same time, his unique role in that offense probably solidifies higher snaps this year and a high target share. So he's certainly solid. I just happen to be a little bit below some of the people that are Jaden Reed truthers. It's funny how that works sometimes, right? With a lot of these prospects where I love them coming out. Then some things happen with I don't know, the situation or performance or, it's and then I'm a little bit lower. And then all of a sudden there's this hive. And I'm like, whoa, slow down, pump the brakes. It's like when you're a fan of a band 5 albums ago, and then some other people come anyway. But that's kind of how I feel with Jaden Reed. Lab McConkey, I'm a truther. So, take that with whatever grain of salt you want. Christian Kirk, I want to love the floor and the targets, but we're hearing some stuff. And again, this is preseason, it's camp, but it's all we have to go on. That, he may be even more confined to the slot role / not on the field as much, getting the number of snaps we want him to see. I don't know. Remains to be seen. I know that Trevor likes to throw to the slot, so I still think he's going to be fine. But those are your top 4, and none of them really, I think, are a stud. The only guy that really has, I think, the upside to be Garrett Wilson, A.J. Brown tier is a guy like Odunze, but he's a rookie. He hasn't done it yet. And behind him, we've got Dotson and Roman Wilson. Man, I was wrong about Roman Wilson, at least for now. Vibes are well low on Roman Wilson. Hurt, not performing well behind guys like Van Jefferson and Calvin Austin. But Dotson, I happen to be a truther on. I think you've got a bounce back this year coming. He's going to be playing more in the slot this year. I think he's very undervalued. So you've got solid wide receivers, but there's risk here or there. There's uncertainty here or there. I would want to see a clear, that's my one. That's my wide receiver one. Right? Your tight ends are solid, but you probably don't need 3 in this format. Freiermuth, I think, is undervalued at the moment. I think, when we think about the target shares on that team, I think, he's going to be easily number 2. I think he's in for a bigger year than some people think. Dalton Schultz is the, I don't know, mayonnaise and saltine crackers of tight ends. He'll be fine, especially if there's an injury to a wide receiver. But, I would move him and keep Sinnott for the upside rather than keep Schultz for the supposed floor that he doesn't really have. And your cap space seems kind of middling, kind of meh. So what I would do with this team, I would maybe want to steady your quarterback group, but I'd be okay with that going into the year. I'd want to add 1 to 2 total running backs and subtract 1 total tight end. While doing this, try to tier up for a wide receiver. So I might do the unthinkable here and trade Bijan. And, Bijan and a receiver and get some value back, get a couple running backs and a higher end wide receiver, whatever you need to do with the contracts and stuff. That might be fun. Have fun with it.
Yeah, I love it. Kyle, anything that you wanted to talk about with the contract side of things?
Well, it's funny. Yeah, go get a true wide receiver one was one of the moves that I was going to suggest. It's interesting, though, we talked about stacks, right? Stack Caleb with Rome, stack Jordan Love with Reed, So it feels like they've built their team around like those stacks. So how do you build around that and augment? To Brian's point, selling Bijan might be that way to do that. That's what maybe gets you the best value in this build that you've kind of set yourself up for. That's what helps there. Do you sell Russell Wilson to go like to get a better QB3, or maybe like a even like a guy that maybe outproduces Caleb this year? The thing about Caleb's contract, 4 years, 37 million total. Not like if he hits to the level that CJ Stroud does, it's a fifth of the value of the contract. It'll be so valuable. Like if he can get to CJ Stroud's level, it's going to easily be the best contract in the league. And I think that's why I had it so high, is the potential of this QB room. I actually really like it. Like Jordan Love's contract's not that bad, 25 million per year. So, you're not paying like what the Mahomes are getting, but you're certainly not even paying what Stroud's getting. So 1 year on every tight end. And that's to that point, I think you could get rid of one because there's no long-term repercussions on the cap. You're not cutting them and, eating half the contract next year in dead cap. You'd essentially, none of them are minimum contracts though. So if you do cut one, you're not saving any money. Maybe a trade is in store somehow. But I also think if we compare it to the last team, you had one tight end only with Ingram. And yeah, I'd rather have Ingram than Schultz or Freiermuth. But then you're stuck having to play Ingram every week. I guess if you have the Schultz-Freiermuth combo, you can play the matchups and maybe get a better tight end like through the aggregate of both of them if you're playing matchups properly. Because Sanat's only 1 year, that's actually the one I was thinking of getting rid of. The tags are cheap. So maybe that's how you keep him for the long term, is you can tag Sanat next year if you think next year he's the tight end you really want to build around. If that was the case, then yeah, hold him through that. But yeah, I would consider just flat up cutting one of these tight ends if you can't trade for them, even if it doesn't actually save you money. But what you're getting is you're freeing up the roster spot more than the cap space.
All right, good stuff. Good breakdown, fellas. Let's get to the number one team.
Number one.
Number one team ranked as high as 1 and as low as 3, and it is Cyrus is Handsome. And Kyle, this is your team, and you actually had them the lowest of the three of us. You had them at 3. I'm assuming it's contract related, but go ahead.
Oh, exactly. Well, I mean, it's something you guys can see, cap space related. This is the other team that has not enough cap space to even add one player right now. Now they have 3 minimum contracts, so you could cut Elijah Moore to add that player, and then it's not adding any extra cap space. So you'd be able to. That's all you could do right now is cut one minimum player and to add another minimum player. So you could still do those moves. But other than that, you can't do anything else. So like if you wanted to go bid, like a good player comes up in free agency, you wouldn't be able to bid on them. You just don't have the cap space to afford anything more than the minimum each time. So finding ways to get cap space might actually be the move to make, because this team is really solid. I think there's a reason you guys both rank them at number 1. They've got depth at running back, really 3 usable guys that are all look to be starters on their team. They've got 4 quarterbacks, and 2 of them on multi-year deals. So long term, it looks like you've got that Burrow and Purdy tied together. Really good wide receivers, especially the top 3, Chase, Pittman, Debo. That's I know in my redraft rankings, I think I've got all 3 in my top 15, and that's just my rankings. But all to say, that's good young guys, all on long-term deals. I mean, Debo's just 2 years, but still, it's more than 1 year. But also really productive right from the get-go. So it helps in a win-now build. They're good for rebuild. And then the stack, Burrow to Chase, and then Purdy to Debo. So again, another team that this league, they love their stacks, and I love to see it correlate. It feels like this would be the format where you'd be more attainable, because at any given point you can bid on any player. Whereas if like in a snake draft and the stacks just don't like the position where you are, the stacks might just not line up. Oh, I take one guy, I take the quarterback, and then his top receiver goes too closely. Like I don't even get a chance at it. This is the format to do it. So they, took advantage for sure. I think if they had even double their current cap space, which would be enough to afford a minimum player, I might have them even higher than I do at 3. I think that was ultimately the reason I didn't put them there, because I viewed the top 3 teams as pretty similar. I just viewed, okay, the other 2 teams, they can actually do things cap space wise. This team can't, so I'll put them 3. But the roster is too strong that I couldn't possibly put them any lower than 3, even with this really tight cap space right now.
Yeah, just to go on that, I know in the chat they're kind of talking about it a little bit as well. Me and Brian are not as versed on this format, which is why we have Kyle here. Me and Brian are looking at these teams from a sheer perspective of dynasty, and this team looks like the best team on paper. Brian, would you agree with that?
Yeah. When I'm looking at again, as we said at the top of the show, we rank in the order of preference we want to take over as an orphan, right? So, I could see Kyle, saying, well, as an orphan, this is really tight cap space. Whereas, I'm looking at, even if there's players I don't love, like Etienne and Jacobs, like I'm saying, okay, this is a team I'd like to take over. You've got some good pieces here, some pieces I love, and some pieces that I don't love that I know I could trade for something. So yeah.
I forgot to mention, I actually love this tight end room. I think the key with Hockenson is not to just put him on a 1-year contract, because this is not going to be a great year, but they got cheap, like $11 million per year for 2 years, expecting next year he's going to maybe repay that price a lot better than he will this year. But they've got Hunter Henry on a 1-year contract. So I think Henry will do just enough to be serviceable as you're waiting for Hockenson to get back. And then next year, Henry's contract expires. You can figure out, if you even if Hockenson finishes the season super strong, you might not even need another tight end. Go with the Chalupa Batman with, I'm just going with Evan Ingram. I'll figure out the backup tight end the week I need to do that. But until that, I'm going to go into the season with just one. If Hockenson finishes strong enough, you might have the confidence to do that next year. So there's at least some flexibility with what you're doing this year. I like that Hockenson was on a longer-term contract, so you at least get better usage of him in future years.
Good stuff. All right, fellas. Well, that wraps up the podcast. I want to thank the league first for their purchase, and then for also joining in the chat. And we've had a really lively chat tonight. The guys, looks like most of them are in the chat talking and chatting. So really appreciate y'all tuning in. You got almost 2 hours worth of content on your league. We had a lot to talk about. So love that.
Thanks, Geoff. I love talking about this stuff so much.
Yeah. Kyle's in this it's like Christmas for Kyle, because then we have the other auction salary cap league next week too. So he'll
Christmas
be
in August.
So, yeah.
Way better weather.
Let's go around the room real quick, guys. Give us your Twitter handle, anything you're working on, anything you wanted to plug. We'll go to you first, Brian.
Yeah, FFJunkie _ on the Twitters, rankings up at goingfor2.com. Going to try to get an article out before the season starts and try periodically do some articles throughout the season. Dynasty Fever podcast at Dynasty Fever Pod on Twitter. We just dropped a new episode. It's more of a long form discussion of I call it the best Dynasty podcast your league mates don't know about. And it's just basically two guys us talking about Dynasty fantasy football. So put it on 1.5x speed or whatever if you need to, and yeah, tune in, because I think our conversations are thoughtful and funny.
Good stuff.
Well, I've heard some people are psychos. They'll listen at 3 speed. I'm sure the conversations would be even funnier at that point.
Talking about chipmunk style. All right, Kyle, what you got?
All right, so I'm on Twitter at Senra Says. I host a few shows for Going for Two Live. Actually, press coverage will be having our season finale this upcoming Monday, the August 19th. I believe we're still haven't for sure confirmed the time. It'll probably be 8 p.m. Eastern, maybe even a little later. I've got both JB and Doc joining me. I think this will be the first time I ever have 2 guests on an episode of Press Coverage.
Nice.
Got something special planned. So that'll be great. In season, I'll be co-hosting the Sunday morning pregame show. 11:30 a.m. Eastern time will be our start time, I believe. And then something I've been doing for the last, 3 years now, 3 or 4.
I think it's 4.
Four. Yeah, co-hosting the Monday night pregame show. Yeah, I think we started in 2020. So yeah, this will be, the 5th year I've been with Gladys and the B League Says. So I love co-hosting with those two. So looking forward to another great season on Monday nights. We'll talk prop betting. We'll talk the game lines for that Monday night. We'll also talk some other bigger fantasy stuff. We do focus a lot on that pregame show Monday night, whereas Sunday morning, it's typical Sunday morning fantasy stuff. Starts, sits. This will be my first year doing it, so I'll talk with Jamie, my guest on Monday again. I love talking to Jamie, so I'm going to get to do it with him on Sunday mornings all year, which is great. I'm looking forward to the opportunity. So thanks again, Geoff, for this opportunity, because I love talking RSO contract leagues, and I love talking PLP. So you put it all together. Perfect.
Good stuff. All right, fellas, you can follow me on Twitter at Geoff Lambert77. Make sure you follow our YouTube channel, which you're watching now. It's going for 2 live. My show's on Wednesday nights. We are debuting a new format for our show this week. We have Jorge Edwards coming on the show for his first time. We're going to be debuting that format, so tune in for that. Other than that, Kyle, Brian, thank you for coming on tonight. I really appreciate it. And to the league mates, we hope to see y'all next year to see how y'all, build your teams throughout the years. I know the league we're doing next year, I think our next week is on their 3rd year, I believe. So we get to kind of see the leagues grow throughout the years. We really love doing these. So appreciate your purchase, and we hope to see y'all next year.